to me, it's fun to watch somebody serve in the area where they're gifted. Whatever the service may be, whatever the activity could be, it requires effort. And honestly, it also requires the discipline of training and learning and education on some level. But usually, and not always, but there are a lot of times when I judge whether or not that's an actual spiritual gift from which they're serving, or whether it's just fluid effort, is the naturalness of it. People who work within their gifts, this is my experience, and I only have 45 years of experience with it, but my experience is that people who are serving and working from their true giftedness, it takes a whole lot more to fatigue them. They can be fatigued. Everybody can be fatigued. We're human. But those who are using their giftedness, expressing themselves through their giftedness, seem to have less difficulty with the fatigue factor. For instance, what about that person who's been teaching the third grade girls for 25 years and they still love it? What about the guys who've been working on the building and grounds for 30 years and they still love doing it? They still show up. They still give it, What about the preacher who's been preaching for 50 years and he's not trying to draw down off of 25 years of notes in his files? That there's a reason for that, and the reason is they are working from their giftedness. Now, the opposite side of that picture is, what about the person who wanted the gratification of what they saw in somebody else, and so they imitated that somebody else? It just so happens, though, that that activity is outside their giftedness. Well, they'll last a little while. Or the person who feels guilty because somebody made an announcement, we don't have workers in this area. If we don't have workers volunteer, we're going to have to shut it down. And so they respond feeling a sense of responsibility. And they will do what they can for, honestly, in the big picture, for a brief period of time. And that's not because they're not dedicated people. That's because that's not in their gift area. When we work in our area of gifting, that effort is sustainable over the long haul. That's important when you look at what we've been talking about in the last few times from 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning in verse 10. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. I just have there's this magnetic draw toward the idea of a faithful steward, for me anyway. And you put together the idea of a faithful steward and God's grace, and you've got my two favorite ideas in all the Bible. Anyway, if anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that, now let's back up, they should do so with the strength that God provides. And that's what I've just been talking about. When you're working from a gifting that God has given you, you're working from the strength that He has provided. This is how He wired you. You are not accidentally gifted in the ways that you're gifted. He meant for you to be gifted in that way. There are times where it feels like you're accidentally put into a position to use your gifts to express your giftedness. And I believe even in that case, no, that's not accidental. That's by plan, not yours, but by His. Well, they should do so with the strength God provides. Why? So that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. That is It's so easy to whiz right past that. And one of the reasons that it's easy to do that is because that idea occurs over and over and over again, all the way through, well, essentially through the whole Bible, but especially in the New Testament. The apostles and the writers of the New Testament books and letters, they return over and over again to the theme that God is to get the glory. I don't want to race over that. In terms of this whole thing we're talking about with people's giftedness, everyone who is gifted, and I believe that's everyone, in one way or another, we may have a very public gift, we may have a gift that is not public at all. It's very quiet, even private. It may be to the masses, but it could be one-to-one. But God has gifted us all. All of us then have to be alert to the fact that the reason that we're doing this, serving one another, utilizing the strength that God has given us, is so that God will get the praise. It's so tempting, especially when you have some sort of a gift that puts you in the public eye, to not remember, hey, whoa, it's not about how good you are. You know, there are times that, it's easy for me to pick on preachers because I am one of sorts, depending on who you ask. I reflect back on Tony Campolo, a talk that I heard him give, and I'll admit to you, I don't agree with everything Campolo says, and in his later years, his liberalism has kind of taken the front. But way back in the day, he shared how he was a part of an African-American congregation, and ever so often they would have kind of a battle of the bands, only it was for preachers. So they would just spend the whole morning and afternoon listening to preacher after preacher after preacher. And he said it came his turn, he got up and he just absolutely nailed it. And he felt really good when he sat down, right? The next guy to preach was an older African-American pastor. And he looked at Tony as he was getting up to move to the pulpit, and said, "Watch this, white boy." And what Campolo said was, this guy just blew him clear out of the water. Those things happen. And is it wrong to feel good when you do good? No, that's not wrong. What is wrong is to misunderstand or forget that this isn't about how good you are. This is about how good God is. I used to have this in calligraphy on the wall of my office. It comes from a talk by, again, Tony Campolo, where he recounts an episode from his training in seminary in a preaching class. For people who've never been in a preaching class, one of the things that happens is you're given a topic or a passage of scripture to exegete and preach on, and then you stand up, you preach it to the class, and then you're evaluated on your content and presentation. And often you're required to submit a thorough outline or manuscript of your message to the teacher. Well, in this class, in which Tony was a participant, he turned in his manuscript. He got up, he gave his message, and he felt like that was the best one in the class, really. I mean, he's trying to be modest, but it really was. He got his paperwork back from his professor, and at the top of the page, there was an A in red, and then a comment. "Great preaching, Tony. Just a thought. It's impossible to make you look good and Jesus look good in the same sermon." Oh, that's kicking the stomach. It is impossible for you to look good and Jesus to look good in the same sermon. Only one can take the spotlight. If it's me, I have to push Jesus out of the spotlight to get there myself. that has informed me, and I think I wrote that little calligraphic thing on my and put it on my wall in the 80s, because every time I get up to deliver, I have to be careful of the fact that because it feels so good to be up in front of people, and it feels so good to tell about what I have prepared, and if I get a positive response, that feels great. That's not the point. The point is, and Peter writes it here, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. When you serve with all your heart. Serve with all your might. But don't forget, not even for a second, it's not so that you'll feel good, and it's not so that you will look good. It's so that God will be praised. What stimulates praise to God most, in my experience, is when people are drawn close to Him. When they notice His activity in their lives and in the world and in people around them. When they're provoked to respond more consistently to His design and live within His grace, extending His grace. There's a bazillion ways to frame it up and talk about it, but when God is praised, it is because of who He is and what He has done, not because of who somebody else is and what they've done. I wonder, and I'm not going to throw rocks at preachers on this, or pastors, or leaders. What I'm going to say is, what if every believer, every follower of Jesus were to discover their gifts, were to express them through service, and yes, they'll experience a deep sense of fulfillment. But you know what else? If they do it right, God will be praised. I wonder what that would do to the church. I don't mean just your church or my church. I'm talking about the church, the entire church. Church with a capital C. I think here's just a couple of things I think. I think it would make the church even more, well, in our day and age, even more would be kind of a stretch in some communities, but it would make the church more attractive to the world. And not in the sense of, oh, they got a light show when their band is up there, and they had a fog machine. And so that's not, I mean, there are some, I think these are very generational, but there are some people who that is attractive to them. They do like that. Okay, I'm fine with that. But you know what? If that's all you got, you don't have much. Okay? I'm not criticizing those who utilize those tools. But what I am saying is that can't be what you're using to be attractive to the world. What will make you and your church attractive to the world is the grace of God being expressed through humility and service. When that happens, God's church will become attractive. And when that happens, God will be praised. And then he finishes up, to Him, God, through Jesus Christ, be the glory and the power forever. Amen. That's a prayer. That's an appropriate prayer for every Christian. God, may the outcomes and output of my life constitute praise to you forever. You and you alone, God, deserve praise forever. There's an interesting thing about that. If you read the book of Revelation and you get all the way to the last two chapters, you discover that one of the continual activities in heaven is that God is praised. Learning how to do that here, learning how to live a life of praise, might just be your best prep for being able to truly engage fully in heaven. Just saying, just a thought. So that's all I got. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.